about some kind of popular things within our little piece of the world. When we talk about like light fastness, we'll talking about things like quinacridone, and so we're going to be chatting about that. I'm going to go over the color chart. The color chart is really an important thing to kind of grasp and understand. It'll help you make wiser choices when you set up your palette. And then towards the end, I'm going to go ahead and paint out some of these beautiful colors so that you can see them live and in person. We all know when you look at the labels on paints these days, it's kind of hard to really see what it looks like. So some of these I'm going to go ahead and paint out for you. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And this is just a presentation that I work with to kind of keep the visualization kind of moving along so that you can get a better idea of how things work with us. So it all started with this guy here. His name is Daniel Smith. He is the founder of our company, and he is a real guy. Daniel Smith isn't his Hollywood name. So he got his starts in the art materials world in 1976 at the University of Washington in Seattle, where he worked at the school newspaper where they actually did the printing. So he really enjoyed that. It kind of gave him a view into a couple different worlds. And he went ahead and started working there. And one day while they were standing around the printing press, people started to ask, you know, this printmaking ink isn't the greatest, and it would be really good if somebody could create a better printmaking ink. And he went ahead and basically went around the room, and everybody said, well, why don't you make a better printmaking ink? Or how about you do it? And then, most everybody just kind of said, yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not sure I have the time to do it. But Dan was a very curious guy, and he loved chemistry. And so he went ahead and did some research and found the best black pigment he could find and the best oil-based binder, brought the ingredients back to his parents' basement, and proceeded to make a batch of ink. And then he brought it back to the school and give it a shot. And lo and behold, it was much better than what they were using. So here's an interesting picture of Dan at the mill, at a really early view of a 3-roll mill. And Dan is sitting down there at the mill, and his 2 friends are there, who were his first employees. So that's kind of what it looked like in the beginning. Then one day, the art department heard about this wonderful black ink, and they wanted to know if they could get some for themselves to try. And Dan was gracious and gave them a batch of his ink, and they loved it. So much so that they went ahead and asked them to make more ink in about 5 or 6 other colors. So since he already knew where the pigment was coming from, it was very simple for him to place another order for the pigment and also for the binder. So I brought all of those colored inks back to the school, and it was a total hit. So much so that the students were actually selling the ink on campus to their friends, and they were coming back to Dan like every other day because they were selling through the ink so quickly. So it got to the point where Dan had to sell his, he had to quit his job at the school printing press in order to keep up with the orders from the art department at the school. So really from that point on, Dan became a paint manufacturer. 1989 comes around, and Dan decides that he's going to make his second product, and that was the Daniel Smith Original Oils. Those are still around today. Not quite as popular as the watercolor, but still a very big product and piece of history for Dan starting the company. But it wasn't until 1993 that Dan decided that he wanted to make watercolor, but he really didn't know how to do it. He didn't know how it was supposed to look, the way it was supposed to feel, perform, you name it. He just didn't know how to do it. So what ended up happening is that he decided that he was going to go visit some of the world's festivals or competitions and gain knowledge from the artists who participated in those things. So he went to Fabriano in Italy and some of the other competitions in China and the Philippines, and uh, got all of the information that he needed to be able to start making watercolor. So he went ahead and brought those first batches of paint back to the artists who had been kind enough to give him some information, and of course they loved it. And they started using it in their workshops. They started using it in their classes, and of course in their work. So basically, once he started getting that kind of support, he was able to launch a bigger palette of color, which at that time was only 18 colors. And then 1998 rolls around, and he came to a point where he said, well, how do I make myself different and unique from everyone else who's making watercolor today? And he really gave some thought to that and came to the conclusion that he wanted to incorporate some of the things that were important to him or interesting to him, and that was history. So he wanted to find or look at all of these different ancient civilizations, look at what they had, and see if he could figure out how to make it available today. So and that started a whole new journey for him, because he needed to figure out what the process would be, because the way that some of these ancient civilizations processed minerals and rocks down just wouldn't work for today. So he went ahead and looked at a number of different civilizations, like down there on the bottom, you see where it says ancient peoples. These were the civilizations that um, Dan really looked at as inspiration. So he looked at the Plains Indians, for example, and lapis, or excuse me, turquoise. The Plains Indians would take turquoise and grind it very finely, and then mix it with animal fat, and then this became their war paint. You think about the Egyptians, for example, and the Egyptians had lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli was a very prominent gemstone, but they also used it for paint. And the Egyptians were master chemists way back when, and they figured out a way to how to precisely manipulate heat to be able to remove impurities. So all of these wonderful examples of history and how these civilizations were actually using minerals and rocks to create color. So lots of fun things to look at there. Um, so one of the things that happened, though, was he needed to figure out a way to be able to process more at a time than the way that the civilizations did. So the challenge that he had was, if he went ahead and made it or grinded it down too fine, it would lose a lot of its interesting qualities. So whether that's the granulation of the color, or color that has shimmer associated with it. So if he made those particles, those minerals, too fine, then they would lose what's interesting and valuable about them. And during his research, he figured out that there was a process that he could use that would make the minerals small enough so that they would work for paint, but not lose what was interesting and valuable about them. And we call that process Primatech. Primatech is short for primitive technology. And this is just kind of a little bit of a flow chart here. And we just give you some idea of kind of what that looks like. And then in the following pages here, we definitely get we definitely get into some details. So before I do that though, I see Sue has a question. Most of my paints are DS, but I really don't like raw sienna over 15 years ago. So chalky. Should I give it another chance? Well, you know, Sue, one of the things that I think is wonderful as artists is that, you know, me included, I have colors from other manufacturers that I work with that I love dearly, and there are some colors that you know, that even though it is Daniel Smith, there are certain times when I prefer certain colors to others. So if you're not a fan of ours, that's okay. Um, we try very hard to have a lot of consistency. So I would be interested to kind of talk with you more about that and have you tell me more about what's going on. So if you hang on at the end there, I would love to kind of answer your question in a little bit more detail there. All right, so how does it start? Well, it starts with this guy named Bruce, and he is our full-time mineralogist, and he has the fun job of going all over the world and meeting with all of our mine owners and procuring all of our mineral. So when he goes and meets with these mine owners, he's looking for a few things. So when we buy mineral, we're buying it in 15-year increments. So help me out here. Why do we want to buy mineral in such large quantities?
For consistency in color.
Absolutely. That's the number one thing. We want to be consistent. We want to make sure that from batch to batch, our colors offer you the same vibrancy, the same light fastness, and the other qualities. What's number two?
Price?
So, yeah, price. So if we go to Costco, right, and we go and do some shopping at Costco, we get a really good price because we buy in what?
Bulk.
Absolutely. So you get a better price when you buy in bulk. Now, what do you think the third thing is? That it doesn't really have, it's related to you guys, but not exactly.
The quality?
No, quality is kind of what we tie into consistency.
Okay.
What it really comes down to is being able to make sure that you all have a good supply of product. And that also means for our retailers, making sure that they have a steady supply of our colors. So we want to make sure we do that. The best way we do that is to make sure that we always have 15 years of raw material before we go and make a production run. So those are the three reasons why we buy it in such large quantities. I mean, we're literally buying these in boulder sized quantities. So basically, I saw one big piece that they brought in, and it was literally the size of a Volkswagen. It was just huge. So the other thing that Bruce does is he arranges the transportation. He arranges a truck, skip loader. They get it into a container, and that container heads to the port of Seattle, and where there's another truck waiting for it to take it into the factory. And then when we're ready to go, when we're ready to make what we call a production run, we break off a piece about the size of a watermelon. So we're breaking off something about like this big. And we put it in our first mill, which is what we call a jaw mill. And that jaw mill does something really interesting. It takes the big, large watermelon-sized pieces of mineral and causes that to break down into something that is this size. So it's breaks them down into about the size of a softball. Okay, so we get about 10 to 12 of these out of that watermelon size piece of mineral. So from there, we take it to the next mill, which is what we call our hammer mill, and it looks like this here. That one there, right here. So what's going on there? The gentleman that you see there on the top left, he's holding on to a clamp, and that clamp goes over the mineral. And when he pushes it inside of that little black area, he's able to make minor adjustments about where the blade eats into the mineral to be able to remove the product that we don't want. So if we look at lapis lazuli here, and you see all of this gray here, this is all product that we can't use. So we have to figure out a way to remove that. So that spinning blade eats into the mineral and removes the product that we don't want. And usually when we do that, at the end of that process, now we're going to be getting into pieces now that are this small. So typically we'll get probably about 5 or 6 of these out of something like this. And that really is kind of interesting. So we started really, really big, and now we're working our way down into something really, really, really small. So now we're here, and it moves into our next mill, which is what we call our ball mill. And to me, this is where all of the magic happens. Okay, to me, this is like not only is it the simplest part, but it's also where I think all of the where the miracle happens. So basically, you have these small little marble-sized pieces of mineral, and you put it into the ball mill, and that ball mill is a spinning cylinder, and then inside of it, it has about 1,000 ball bearings, and then you load these small little pieces of mineral on the side. And when it gets in there, it tumbles against all of these ball bearings, and it breaks it down into something that is really, 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 really small. So basically, it breaks it down into what we call 40 microns. So microns is a unit of measure. Okay. So if you have a sheet of just printer paper nearby, feel that. That's 100 microns. Okay. What this is being broken down into is less than half of the diameter or half the thickness of that sheet of paper. So tiny, 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 tiny. Matter of fact, it is so small, our eye cannot see anything smaller than that. 40 micron is the limit for what our eye can see. So that's what's falling out of the bottom of that, out of the bottom of the ball mill. So very interesting. How we can get something so small, but not lose what's interesting and valuable about it. So whether that's the beautiful granulation here of zoisite, or the shimmer of kyanite. So to me, that's the crazy part. We make it so small, but we don't lose what's interesting and valuable. All right, you guys have any questions so far?
If you do, just unmute yourself and ask. Guess not. Guess we'll move on.
All right. Feel free to put it in the chat if you don't want to. If you don't want to unmute yourself, that's totally fine too. All right. So now that we have everything to the right size, we take it here, and this is where we bring all of our ingredients together. So we only have 3. So we have our pigments, we have our mineral, and we have gum arabic, and then we also have distilled water. Why do you guys think we use distilled water instead of tap water? Tap water certainly would be a lot cheaper.
Mineral content?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what else? I used to live in the Central Valley, and we used to have well water, and our water was so hard. And it was hard because there was mineral in it. Which mineral do we definitely, or do we associate hard water with?
Calcium.
Very good, Sue. Thank you. Yep. Yep. That's what. So that's what's in a lot of tap water. Now, there's other things too that are in there that some we do for our health, and then others is really for something else. So fluoride, we know, is the one thing, but in other parts of the country, they actually use chlorine to actually help with the purity of the water. So, but none of these things really sound great for the paint making process. So, so the reason why we really use distilled water is really just to achieve a consistent result every time. All right, Brenda. Brenda has a question. What percentage of yield do you get from the ores? That's a really good question, and one that is really tough to answer because depending upon which part of the boulder per se, that we decide to take that watermelon-sized chunk from, it may be different from batch to batch. So um, a lot of times it's really, when we go ahead and do that, we may have to go back and add more mineral if we're not quite getting the yield that we wanted. So in terms of from a production run, it's very tough in the beginning to know exactly how much usable product is in because we can't see all the way through the mineral. So it's a bit of a mystery until we get into a little further into the process. All right, Tanvi, how do you decide which colors / pigments to make transparent or sedimentary? Uh, is it to do with how you can grind down the mineral, or can every mineral be made transparent? Um, Usually when we decide to bring a new uh, mineral to the market or a new Primatech color to the market, we really do look at that. We look at to see, okay, is this going to offer some transparency? Is it transparent at all? I would say that as a company, we are definitely more geared towards transparent color in my mind, especially when we look at things. It's kind of the current owner of Daniel Smith. He really likes to push or move forward colors that are transparent. As far as this sedimentary, yes, we can grind them down, but at a certain point with mineral, if we grind down the mineral too far, we lose what's interesting and valuable about it. So we get to a point to where there's a diminishing return. So for some of these minerals, we can only get them down to that 40 micron, and that's it before we lose what's valuable about the color. So other colors, if we're talking about synthetics, for example, synthetics, we can make them as fine or as chunky as we want. So it's really all about what we can do scientifically or through chemistry that really allows us to add different effects through granulation or transparency. Usually, transparency though it's just inherent with the mineral or the pigment. Basically saying that it was a part of the equation from the beginning. It wasn't something that we could create. It's just something natural that happens. All right. So we have all of our ingredients together and we put them into these mixing vessels here. And what you see is various sizes. So the smallest one you see there is 3 gallons. And then the biggest one in the back, we really had to shrink down. It's actually very large. It's 300 gallons. And so depending upon the color that we're working with on that day, we may choose to use the largest one, or if it's a color that doesn't sell as quickly, then we will use that small one there. So now that we've got the vessel, we've got our ingredients, we take it down to the mixing station. This is where we blend all of our ingredients together, and that mixing station is actually a much bigger piece of equipment than kind of what we're showing there. We really had to shrink it down in order for it to kind of so we could use it in this presentation. So basically, when we use that, we raise that machine 16 feet tall. Okay. And then we put that bucket underneath, and the blade is on the end of that shaft there, and it churns the paint at a really, really high rate of speed. Basically, it churns it so fast it creates what's called a Venturi effect. And that Venturi effect is drawing air into the mixture of the paint. causing it to do, or causing it to rise and change the texture of the paint, which is good and bad. Yes, we want our paint to be blended properly, but when you blend, just like when you're blending a smoothie, when you infuse a lot of air into the water, it kind of changes the consistency or the viscosity of the paint. So we love it that it churns, but it doesn't do the job completely. So the other thing that happens that we really don't like is that when you have all of that static electricity that was drawn, or excuse me, all the air that was drawn into the mixture of the paint, it creates static electricity, which causes those paint particles to tangle. And what we call those tanglements is what we call agglomerates. Okay, so that's what happens when all of those paint particles are all together. So we have to figure out a way to rip them apart, because we want them to look like what you see down on the bottom, where you have all of those circles and they're laid out in a more linear fashion. The arrows, that is light, and that has to do with the actual vibrancy of the color. So we want to be able to create that scenario where the light goes into the pigment, or the pigment matrix, and then light leaves in a uniform direction. So how do we do that? Well, what we have is what we call a dispersion mill, and it looks like this. So it has 3 cylinders, and then each of those cylinders is spinning in the opposite direction of each other. So cylinder number 1 is spinning this way, cylinder number 2 is spinning this way, and then cylinder number 3 is spinning this way. So when the paint goes over the top of the first cylinder and hits the second, it's literally like a train wreck that happens, and it literally rips those paint particles apart, gets rid of those agglomerates. And the same thing happens again when the paint passes over cylinder number 2 and then hits number 3. That same tearing effect happens all over again, so that the gum arabic and the distilled water can get in between each of those paint particles. Now, depending upon which color we're talking about, it may take 5 or 6 times through the dispersion mill in order for the paint to look right. So the other thing too is that, you know, we have all of this texture change because of the mixing station. So what we do to kind of solve that is that we bring those cylinders as close together as possible, and then it literally crushes the air out of the paint. So the dispersion mill really does is an important piece of equipment for us, because it removes some of the agglomerates, and it also helps remove some of the air that was trapped in the paint during the mixing process. All right. Here's a look at kind of what these things look like in real life.
Kind of looks like a fruit roll up.
It kind of does, yeah. This is actually anthraquinoid red going over the press, and the way you're seeing it is that triangle there, right here, kind of that's coming towards you. We call that the apron, and the paint actually starts in the very back, and the paint moves along those cylinders and then ends up over here, where a gentleman with a bucket is there, and he literally has a squeegee, and he squeegees all of the paint into his bucket. Here's a little different look. So this gentleman right here is actually putting paint on cylinder number 1 and feeding the paint onto cylinder number 2. So that's kind of how that looks. After we get done with the milling of the paint, or putting it over the dispersion mill, we take it to our tube filling station. And the tube filling station is actually, there's a little bit more than going on than what meets the eyes. So basically what happens is there's a carousel that comes in front of that tube filling station, and the tubes are upside down. And so the cap is down here, and then the other part of the tube is up. And there will be like a little straw that goes down inside of the tube and injects the tube with the right amount of paint. And then after it's filled, it goes ahead and then it crimps it. It crimps the tube. And then it also stamps what we call a batch number on it. That batch number is really important because it coincides with one of these, which is what we call a paint out. And the paint out is actually like a recipe card. The recipe card will contain everything people need to know about what went into that batch of paint. So how much mineral, how much pigment, the precise amounts of gum arabic and distilled water, the chemist's name, the machine operator's name, the time of day it happened, the temperature and the humidity of that day. So anything and everything that we can think of that might have had an impact on the way this color looks will be on the back of that paint out. And those batch numbers, just kind of go back to the batch numbers on the tubes, those batch numbers are actually worthwhile for you to make note of. Because let's say, for instance, you had a Cascade Green, for example, and you really loved it, and you went ahead and you went through it and bought another tube. And then while you were using the second tube, you noticed that there was something kind of slightly off. And you were kind of wondering why that is. Well, you could call Daniel Smith, and then you could give them the two batch numbers that are stamped on the tube, and then they'll pull those two paint outs out and do a comparison, and they'll say something like, you might have something there. We need to go back and take a look at that. But more often than not, it's usually this answer, and it goes something like this. Hey, Scott, was your water clean? And I go, oh. And or it'll be, or it could also be, what was in your brush the day before? So anyway, so we hold on to these paint outs for a very, very long time, just so that we can promise you as much transparency and to our consistency as possible. All right, you guys got any questions so far?
Well, I have to say, Scott, it's very fascinating. It's amazing how many steps you go through.
It is a very hands-on process.
Yeah.
Just an interesting little bit of trivia. So we can actually, with it's a crew of 8 people, 3 shifts, and we can turn out 5,000 tubes a day. Big amount. All right, got another question here. I had a Daniel Smith Cerulean Blue that came out separated from the gum arabic from the tube. Does that happen often? Well, a lot of what happens there with that has to do with the way that we store our tubes. So if you store your tubes vertically, what can tend to happen is that the pigment can separate, and the pigment is heavier than the gum arabic, and the gum arabic will push towards the top. Now, just a little trick that I've learned when I've seen that, I've went ahead and I found a T-pin or a sewing needle, and then I just went ahead and reconstituted or blended the paint again in the tube. That way, you don't have to worry about having that excess gum arabic sitting in your palette. So does it happen often? It has everything to do with the way that you store the tube, but it's easily solvable. Susie's asking, well, how do we store our tubes then? Well, the best way to store your tubes is to lay them flat and to make sure that they're not exposed to extreme temperature differences. It's not so much a problem here in the Bay Area. Unless you leave your paint outside in the winter where, it can get below freezing every once in a while. But paint does not like extremes in temperatures. So having your paint, in a room temperature room laid down flat definitely really goes a long way in making sure that that gum arabic doesn't separate from the other ingredients.
Scott, that's interesting because, you know, when you come into an art store, every single tube is hanging.
It's hanging vertically. Yes, it is.
Yeah,
So, it's more of a merchandising problem for us,
exactly.
because if you were to lay paint on their sides, then you wouldn't be able to hold very many tubes in that rack of paint.
Right, exactly.
So we're kind of forced to do it that way. But if you go ahead and store them laying flat after you get them home, that'll solve some of the gum arabic issues, kind of floating to the top. So, but remember, you can fix that. Just get a T-pin and stir it up in the tube before you squirt it out into your palette.
That's a good tip. Yeah.
Yep. Susie, did that answer your question? Hope so. All right, let's jump back in here. All right, so I'm going to show you a little bit or some of the testing procedures that we go to. And one of probably the most important one to us is actually light fastness, because we actually rate them and put that rating on the tubes and also on our literature. So we felt that it was very important to be able to have access to a machine that would help us legitimize what we say our light fastness ratings are. So we have this machine. It's called a xenon phaedometer, and it's about the size of your refrigerator. And this is what it looks like on the inside. So on the inside here, it has a carousel, and the carousel has our paint outs. So all of our lovely one of these, and we put it in there. And then you see that rod that's kind of in the middle, that rod that comes down. In the center of it is a light bulb that produces a very, very, very bright amount of light. Basically, it's able to replicate 120 years worth of light exposure in 4 days. So think about that for a second. 120 times 365 in 4 days. That's a crazy amount of intense light. So think about the light that we get at 12 noon on a sunny day. That is the amount of light that is being projected onto those paint outs, and it simulates that brightness for 120 years over 4 days. So that thing gets so hot that if we didn't put distilled water down the center of that bulb, the whole machine would melt. All right, Candy has a question. How long can we keep the tubes if they are not open and used? So generally speaking, in that scenario, probably a minimum of 5 to 6 years, I would say. And the other thing that I would also mention is, even though our paint or our watercolor may have gotten dried up in a tube, it doesn't mean that it isn't any good. You can still go ahead and get a little bit of water, and the paint will react or re-wet. If it's still tough, you can also take gum arabic and add a little gum arabic to that, and that generally will. It's kind of like the butter. It's kind of the thing that greases the skids and getting the paint back to more of a almost more of a pasty form, which is generally how it comes out of the tube. So a little bit of gum arabic can also be added in order to get the consistency back. All right, Susie, what is the paper weight for your paint outs? Susie, we use a 140-pound cold press, and the paper is actually made by Lenacquerel. So it's actually a paper that is produced in Europe. It's not terribly popular here in the US, but we love it because the sizing is almost always perfect. It's very uniform, and when we do these paint outs, just like everything else, we want them to be consistent. All right, so after the 4 days, we take those paint outs out and then we put them next to a template, and then based upon the amount of fade there is, determines what the light fastness rating is on each of these colors. So that's how we're kind of able to tell you how long these colors will last when exposed to ultraviolet light. All right, so that other machine over there, that photospectrometer, that machine helps us to make sure that our batches are consistent from one to another. So the way that it works is you see that black candle that you see up in front. So it's the one right here. What you do is you pull that handle towards you and it exposes a window. And that window, you go ahead and you take a little chunk of your paint out, and then you put it in that window, and then you pull the handle close again. And then a computer goes ahead and registers what we call a C-lab number. And basically it makes it, so basically it assigns basically the way the color looks, it assigns it a value. And that value we record and we use it to compare it to other batches so that it's consistent from one to the other. So if that photospectrometer says it's a 48, then we are going to be looking at every batch from then on to be a 48. So, and that's the way we're able to legitimize the consistency part that we do. Susan, Linacrylal. So Linacrylal is it's interesting. Is it made by Canson? I'm not sure. Actually, I thought that they were kind of a standalone brand. I've been kind of interested in them for a while. I've been wanting to get more of their paper because I think it's got a really beautiful texture to it. Anyway, thanks, Sue. All right,
Scott,
yeah.
yeah, when I just Googled it, it came up La Aqua, I can't even say that,
Linacrylal.
Heritage, but if it's not Canson, I'm not sure who else it is then. Yeah, maybe somebody else knows.
Yeah. All right. Before we moved into granulation, any other questions there so far? Sennelier. No, Sennelier does not make that paper. As far as I know, Sennelier only makes paint.
They do. That's only paint. They just call it La Aquarel. I can't even say that. Yeah.
Right. Okay, let's talk about granulation for a second. And granulation, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's a textural effect that you see here. So it's all of this modeling, I guess is probably a good word for that. And this is caused by when the paint the mineral or the pigment is heavier than the distilled water and gum arabic that it sits in. So the particles, the paint particles or the mineral particles, want to flow into the tooth of the paper, and the other products want to float to the top. So that's how granulation happens. So what can we use granulation for? What could we use this color for? Don't say texture. I'll reach through the computer and slap y'all. Give me some real rubber meets the road things. What could you use this color for?
Any kind of vegetation.
Absolutely.
Anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So think about foliage, think about grass, leaves. One of the things that I came to understand about colors that granulate and why I started to gravitate towards them was really for my dislike of trying to do detail. And what I figured out was that granulating colors do a much better job of articulating what nature can do than I can with my brush or my pen. So granulating colors, since they act in a natural way, produce a much more natural look to me. So I love to use granulating colors for, especially for landscapes. So let's look at another color here and get some ideas. So this is hematite. What could we use hematite for?
I love hematite. That's one of my favorites.
Hematite is a very versatile color. It could be used for a multitude of different things. It has a lot of tonality between more what the mass tone looks like all the way down to what it looks like kind of stretched out with water. But what can we use this for? Yeah, Dana, very good. Rocks. What else?
Pavement.
Yeah, all of our urban sketcher friends. This is a wonderful color for urban sketchers. So let me ask you all this. Do you think you're going to get more or less granulation if you use hot press paper?
Don't know.
Well, let's think about the texture of hot press. What is it like?
Smooth.
Less, yeah. It's smooth because there is less tooth. And the way that hot press paper is made is that it comes down in this really smelly slurry. If you ever go to a paper mill, it's one of the smelliest places you'll ever go. So, but the slurry of the mixture of the paper comes down a conveyor belt, and then it meets the steel cylinder, which is extremely hot. And as the paper goes underneath the cylinder leaves an impression on the paper, okay? And then it goes by. So what we have with cold press is you get rid of that steel cylinder, and it's replaced with a like this contraption that actually has a blanket, or it's what the paper companies call a felt. And that felt comes down, and then it also leaves an impression on the paper. Now, depending upon the texture of that felt determines whether the paper is cold press or it's rough. So we kind of answer the question. So if there's not as many nooks and crannies, we see less granulation. Now, the more nooks and crannies we have, the more granulation we see. So if you are wanting to work on something that had just a ton of texture with it, think about rough paper. One of the things that I've really had to kind of or encourage myself to do is to experiment with different types of paper. The paper that you use is actually a tool to achieve an effect that we're trying to convey. So don't forget about your paper when you're thinking about or laying out your plan. All right, let's head on back here. Oops.
Hey, Scott, before we move on, this is Susan. We found the paper, the right paper. It's Lana Lanacra L from the UK.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
That's
it's lovely paper. It's lovely paper if you could ever get your hands on it.
Right.
But what I really like about it is the texture and the really even sizing that they put into. The sizing is always consistent.
That's something that's a nice tip, because a lot of us use arches, and I know in the past year, almost 2 years, arches has had a real issue with their sizing, and a lot of people were moving away from it. So it's nice to have another paper.
Yeah, it's arches is an animal base sizing, and it has some real consistency problems. If you ask me, there is nothing more beautiful than the texture of arches paper. But when you start to work with it and you start to see these little imperfections, you're like, how did that happen?
Right.
And primarily my workhorse paper is the Fabriano or Artistico.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar to the Lawn Aquarelle. Very consistent sizing, nice feel. I wish it had the texture of arches, and then I would be totally sold. But Fabriano, the Artistico, that's got a very nice consistent sizing, and but I haven't found anybody's as consistent as the Lawn Aquarelle there.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's talk about quinacridone for a moment. We love quinacridone colors as watercolors. We love the transparency. We love a lot of things about these quinacridone colors, but we don't know necessarily a lot about them. So I thought we'd just spend a moment and just kind of really break it down to give you some background into really what these colors are. So let's do this. So quin means what? What does quin mean?
Don't know.
All right, Candy, help me out. What does quin mean? She goes, uh-oh, he called on me. Brenda, very good. Wendy, thank you. Yes, 5. Quin means 5.
Oh,
And,
duh.
uh-huh. And credone means rings in Latin. So this is 5. This is what it's describing is 5 rings. So that's what quinacridone means. So we kind of have them, we kind of show you what it looks like under a microscope right there. So basically you have 5 rings. Now, the other question I always get is, well, what the heck is it made out of? And then we actually give you the chemical formula down there. So it's basically that recipe. It's those ingredients and those elements, and those elements in those quantities create quinacridone. So a little bit of history about quinacridone. Quinacridone was discovered in the 1890s by a German chemist, but it wasn't really until the mid 50s that this huge corporation decided to make it available for car paint. Anybody know who that was?
Ford.
No, Ford actually bought the paint from this company.
Ferrari.
Nope.
We don't know.
All right, it was bought from the DuPont Corporation. So DuPont was the first one to make quinacridone colors in bulk. So they went ahead and then sold to Ford and Ferrari and to the rest of the car manufacturers. So that's how quinacridone kind of came to be. Now, let's talk about some of its qualities. So things that I really like about quinacridone is really the vibrancy and the transparency of the color. So let me show you a few of those. I really love our quinacridone colors because we can get just some huge swings in terms of the way we can, way chemists can get these colors to look. So go ahead.
Will you spotlight yours or take so we can see you up closer?
Oh yeah, sorry. Oops. Let's do this. Oh, what happened here?
Yeah, just
You can also move his screen and make it bigger with the slider.
I got it. Sorry about that. Let's do it. Here we go. Now we got it. So here we have quinacridone red, and we go all the way to the orange with quinacridone burnt orange. So we have this huge expanse of shades in between. We have 14, as a matter of fact. We have 14 quinacridone colors. So let me ask you all this. Do you see any granulation here at all? Nope, right? Any texture you see is actually caused by the paper. So there's no granulation, and there's a reason for that. So on just a second ago, we were looking at this here, and oops, we got to actually start the presentation again. That got booted. There we go. Okay, so here you see all of the rings. Now, all of those rings are exactly the same. Okay, they are all the same size, the same shape, and the same weight. So when you have that scenario together, you don't have granulation because those particles actually come together in a very seamless way. Just like imagine for a second if you had a jigsaw puzzle and all of those pieces were exactly the same. That's how these come together. So they come together in a very neat and organized way. And when you have that, then we don't have granulation. All right, Sue's got a question. There is a new Quinn Gold made from a mix. How does it compare to the single chemical? So Quinn Gold, we got to go back in time a little bit. And the year 2000, the pigment manufacturers stopped making this particular variant of PO49. So, and when that happened, manufacturers at that point had to go to a two pigment solution for Quinn Gold. Okay, so whether that was Winsor Newton, whether that was Holbein, that was literally everybody. That same year, we found the last remaining stockpile of it, and it lasted us until 2017. And at that point in 2017, we had to join the rest of the world in going to a two pigment solution. Other manufacturers just chose to change this to go to a different shade altogether. So we went ahead and created a two pigment solution using pigment orange number 48 and nickel titanate yellow. It's very, very close to what the original was. It looks slightly more yellow when it's wet, but it still blends, and actually when it dries, it actually still looks like a pretty close match. So is it new? It is new when you consider kind of how we've released new colors. But we're actually just joining the rest of the world. Okay. So here's just a look at kind of the expanse of the color, going all the way from quinacridone coral all the way to burnt scarlet. So nice big expanse of color there. And by the way, Daniel Smith was the first to actually incorporate quinacridone colors into watercolor. We were the very first to do that. Okay. You guys have any other questions before I move into showing you some more of our beautiful minerals?
I had a question.
Go ahead.
So when I look at, I have something called Piemontite Genuine, which is a Primatech color. So in that, it doesn't say P, the pigment number, it says genuine Piemontite. So does that mean that the things that say the P number, that they're a mix of pigments, and the things that it's, if it says genuine mineral, then it's just the mineral, no pigment added?
Correct. So, and that's, and because we didn't, the world hasn't assigned a shade to the minerals, we just call it the genuine mineral. So when you have something that's created in a lab that is made synthetically, then that's when a designator is assigned to it, like PO49, for example. All right, let's take a peek at some of these minerals. First one I'm going to show you is, I'm going to just go ahead and get out of this so you guys can have a bigger screen, is Minnesota pipestone. So Minnesota pipestone, we actually get from here from the US. And it is, I think we get it out of Nebraska. And what's really interesting about this mineral in the way, the reason it gets its namesake is that the Plains Indians would use the pipestone here to make their peace pipes out of. That's why it's called Minnesota pipestone. But it's a beautiful color, wonderful for flesh tones, lots of different color values you can get out of this. But it's a really interesting mineral too. It has this really nice softness to it. So you can understand why why they would use it to carve from to make their peace pipes. So that is Minnesota pipestone. Next one I'll show you is Amazonite. This is Amazonite here, beautiful turquoise blue. And this actually comes from Brazil. And what's interesting about this mineral is that the indigenous really believed that this mineral actually had a lot of healing qualities associated with it. So, and the reason why they thought that is if when they held the mineral always felt really, 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 really cool, like almost like holding a ice cube almost. It's very cold. So they thought that by resting the mineral on their sick, that it would help heal them. So, but it's a pretty color too. Very good.
Will you repeat the name of that one?
Amazonite.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Let's look at another one. Let's look at tiger's eye. Tiger's eye is a really beautiful mineral in its raw form. We get it from South Africa. And see if you can see those bands of color in there. They're almost iridescent almost. And those darker areas that you see kind of here along the top, that's actually iron. So if you were to get your kitchen magnet out, it would stick to the mineral. It's because that iron makes it magnetic. So really interesting color, very nice warm brown.
Looks like it granulates a lot too.
It granulates a ton.
Yeah, beautiful.
So lots of different things we can do with this. Now, one of the things that as a paint manufacturer that we can do is we can create whole different colors just by introducing heat into the mix. And that's what we do here with tiger's eye. We can take tiger's eye and put it in a kiln for about 8 hours at about 600 degrees. And then when it comes out, the color is very different altogether. So this is what it looks like when it comes out of a kiln for 8 hours. Very dark.
No, it looks like chocolate cake.
It does look like chocolate cake. It looks like the yummiest brownie I've ever seen. So and here's what it looks like. So heat, when you expose it to the mineral for that long, it changes what's called the oxidation state. And when that happens, it changes the color all the way through the mineral.
So is that one a different color now?
Yep, we give it its own name. So this is burnt tiger's eye. Just like we have burnt umber, you name it, same sort of thing. All right, this is jadeite. And jadeite is another one we get from the US. It's a very heavily granulating, almost deep sap green. And it's an extremely potent and beautiful color. All right, let's look at lapis lazuli for a moment. Lapis is actually very interesting. So we get it actually from 2 different parts of the world. So we get some from Afghanistan, and we would love to be able to get all of our lapis from Afghanistan, but political things that are happening in that part of the world are still far from decided. So it's much more difficult to be able to get this quality lapis out. So we have to go and actually get it from Chile, and Chile is where we get the vast majority of our lapis from. And this is Sleeping Beauty turquoise. And this comes from the Sleeping Beauty mine in Arizona. We didn't rip off Walt Disney to use his name. So the Sleeping Beauty mine is located south of Phoenix, Arizona. And we were stopped from getting more mineral from this mine in 2006 because the mine actually hit the water table and caused the mine to fill. And so we're no longer able to get Sleeping Beauty turquoise from the Sleeping Beauty mine. All right, Jackie had a question. It says, why doesn't it rust? Jackie, for some reason, when you have iron and that iron isn't completely pure, it doesn't tend to want to rust. If it was totally pure iron, then absolutely we would see some rusting as far as that is concerned with the tiger's eye, for sure. Good question. Susie is asking, where do you get the Sleeping Beauty from now? Well, we are still working on our 15-year supply of Sleeping Beauty turquoise. So you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, 2006, 2021, this is, you know, you guys should be out of this by now. Well, the answer is Sleeping Beauty, while it's a beautiful color, it's not one that's of our most popular, believe it or not, even though it's really beautiful. So we're still sitting, you know, I'm still sitting pretty good on this for the next little while. All right. Any questions before I get into the color chart? Okay. All right, let's head back over here. Mind me. There we go. So understanding our color chart is really an important thing, and understanding that the information that we have in there is really helpful in making wise choices with your colors. So we went ahead and we really did our best to be able to create a color chart that gave you as much information as possible. So just to kind of show you how the layout works is if you were to open our color chart out wide, if you were to open it out like that, this would be the side that you were looking at. And this is kind of where our general colors kind of hide or live. So all of our colors that are made from synthetic pigments and also some natural ones. And so those all live on this side of the color chart. Now, to find the Primatech colors, you would look on the very back, and those would live on the very back of the color chart. So they're going to be back here. So they're here. And then down below the Primatech colors are the luminescent ones. So when I say luminescent, I'm talking about our interference, our iridescence, and our duochrome colors. Okay. So what is all of, so the question I get a lot is, what are our duochrome colors? So we're going to take a look at duochrome saguaro green. So what you have is one pigment that bounces between two colors. So on the left side, you have your white watercolor paper. And then on the right, you have a dark black ground or gesso. And when you paint over that, you see all of these beautiful, brilliant streaks of green and gold. So in the way that happens is that they treat the mica, they oxidize it in such a way that changes the way that light goes into the particle and the way that it exits. So when that happens, chemists are able to change what we see based upon the background in which the color is used with.
Scott, I'm confused. Are you saying that if you take this paint and one side of your paper is white and the other side's got the black gesso, and you paint that one duochrome green color on it, you're going to get the light brown color on one side and the green on the other?
Yes, you are.
That's wild.
Absolutely. A lot of people like to use these duochrome colors to be able to blend with other things to kind of impart some of these interesting effects. For instance, I had a friend of mine who would take Viridian and then mix it with this duochrome saguaro green, and he would get some very interesting effects with that sort of blend.
That is wild. Wow.
there's what it looks like without all those letters and numbers in there. And that's one of the more dramatic ones that we have. So what about all of these terms? So what does iridescent actually mean? So iridescent, the best way to think about it is a reflection. So the particle of light hits the paint pigment matrix and then bounces back, kind of just like a mirror, okay? Interference colors, we're talking about refraction. So we're talking about how chemists are able to alter the mica, and when they do that, it causes the light to scatter. So that's why on certain surfaces, why we can't see interference colors at all, and then we put it on another surface, and then it changes entirely. We could go between bright fluorescence all the way to metallics. So depending upon how those how the mica is treated determines whether that's going to be an interference color or an iridescent color. And then duochrome, just like what I explained a second ago, it's when one pigment bounces between two colors. So think about a really fancy paint job on a car where you looked at it from one perspective, it looked one color, and then you took a step or two to the right or the left and it looked like something totally different. So, so that's what duochrome colors do. So that is kind of the layout of the color chart. Now let's kind of dig into the information that's available to you there. So when you open our color chart and you look next to the word watercolor, so up here, there's the word watercolor, and there's a little, what we call a legend. And that legend tells you how to read or what each of these terms actually means, okay? So where it says color information, that's just an indicator to you that those colors move from left to right. The information moves left to right. And then the first real piece of info we give you is the format of the color. So this is what format or what tube size or what basically what it can be available in. So we have a lot of our colors are available in 15 mil tube, watercolor stick, a 5 mil tube, or we have just recently came out with half pan. So, so it's going to be in one of these 4 formats. And we tell you, so we give you that information on the color chart so that you understand what your options are in procuring that particular color. So I always get a lot of questions about the watercolor sticks. So the watercolor sticks are very interesting, and what they're really, really, really good for is travel. Have you ever been on an airplane or taken your tubes of paint with you on an airplane? How fun is that? Sue, how fun is that to travel with tubes of watercolor?
Not fun.
For those of you that don't know, as soon as you open that cap, it goes pop, and then you have paint all over your hands, and that's a result of the pressure changes that happen in the tube when you're on the airplane, and also the temperature difference. So these watercolor sticks are really awesome for travel because they're dry and you don't have to worry about them exploding all over your hands. Sue has a question. Will Daniel Smith ever make 37 mil tubes? Sue, I don't think anybody would want to pay the price for a Daniel Smith 37 mil color. You know, so it's we want to be able to kind of stay within the parameters of kind of where our competitors are. But that surely would be a monstrous size tube of watercolor. You would never go through it. All right, so those are the watercolor sticks. I'll explain a little bit more how to use them when I turn my camera around. I think it's important to kind of have an understanding of what they can do and what they can't do. So just to clarify, that the watercolor sticks it's purely just the gum arabic and the pigment or mineral. It's just those two. There's no distilled water in that. Our half pans, we have a 3-step process in our half pans. So, and they take quite a bit of time in order to make this way. So they're all hand poured. And the reason why we hand pour them and do them in stages is so that you get the maximum amount of paint possible. All right, another question. How true are the colors in the watercolor sticks to the tubes? Susie, they are absolutely the exact same. They use the same ratio of pigment to create the watercolor sticks as we do in our tubes. So there's a look at our half pans. We have them available now in 45 colors, and we now have a total of 9 sets for half pans now. I can show my stick setup that I take when on backcountry trips. You know, that's really interesting. I've seen a lot of really cool ideas in terms of how to utilize the watercolor sticks. Probably the most inventive one I've ever seen is somebody used a Altoids tin, and then they put basically wax paper down in the bottom, and then dried their watercolor or put their sticks on them, let them dry, and then that was a really convenient way of taking your watercolor sticks with you. So lots of fun and different ways you can go about that, but probably that Altoids tin was probably the most creative I've seen. All right, so we know what size the colors can come in now. Let's talk about light fastness. So we actually have a light fastness rating system. We do it in Roman numerals. We have if you see a 1 or Roman numeral 1, that lets you know that color is light fast beyond 100 years. 2 is very good, and that's 100 years. 3 is fair, and that's 50 to 70 years. And any color for us that fades within 15 to 20 years, we consider to be fugitive. So we only have 2 fugitive colors in our entire line. So tell me which 2 you think they are.
Well, it used to be like alizarin crimson.
Alizarin crimson is one, and opera pink is the other. So I always thought it was very interesting that all of my instructors, who I took classes from, all wanted me to learn with alizarin crimson. And I understand why. I mean, it's a single pigment, and that's attractive, but it fades. It noticeably fades over time. So I always thought it was kind of interesting that we would want to learn to paint with colors that fade. Just kind of seems weird to me. Anyway, so down at the bottom there where you see it says non-staining or staining. So what do you guys think that is about? Why would we want to tell you which colors are staining or not? What technique? Yes, very good, Susie. So you guys can understand what the lifting capabilities of each of our colors. So here's kind of a little thing that gives you a visual to kind of see it a little bit better. So there you have cobalt violet at the top, and that is a non-staining color. Down below it, you have Hansa yellow medium, which is a low staining color. You can see you can pick up slightly less than the cobalt. And then you have indant throne blue, which is a medium staining color. So you're picking up even less still. And then carmine is a highly staining color, and you can barely pick up any of that. So if you're dealing with a highly staining color, that's going to be something that pretty much once it's down, you're going to have to learn how to live with it. All right, Jackie asks, what color do you like instead of alizarin? I like anthraquinone red. Is kind of something that in my mind is pretty similar. That's kind of my go-to if I need a quinacridone, or excuse me, not a quinacridone, a alizarin substitute. But that anthraquinoid red kind of gets me to where that middle of the road red is. All right. And so kind of the technical term, that Daniel Smith uses internally is when they talk about staining, it's the particular mineral or pigment's ability to adhere to the fibers of the paper. All right. Okay. So after that, we tell you which colors granulate and which ones don't. So whether it creates this effect here, that's zoicide again. That particular color, it's beautiful. So on the color chart, you'll see it'll say yes for varying degrees, and N equals no. No, that color does not granulate. Okay. Next comes transparency. And transparency is very important. Understanding the transparency of the color will actually help you make wiser decisions on the colors that you work with, because it'll give you the background on the color and give you an idea of how this color is going to play with other colors. So let me ask you this. What happens when you mix a transparent color with an opaque color? Whose nature does it want to take on?
Okay.
Absolutely. So, and wouldn't you have liked to have known that before you bought that particular color? It's the difference for me. It's the difference between being really satisfied with the color and not. Having kind of an advanced understanding before you buy it really makes a lot of sense. Understanding what the different attributes of it are, that particular color, especially as it pertains to transparency, is very important. All right, so you have an open circle. That means that color is transparent. You have semi-transparent, which that means that color doesn't quite have as much transparency. So it's kind of in the middle between semi-transparent and semi-opaque. And then down at the bottom there, you have opaque, which is that darkened circle. All right, and then down there, where anytime you see one of those P's on the tube, that lets you know that that color was derived from a mineral. All right, any questions on the color chart? Hey, Sue, tell me how much time we have. Oh, you're muted.
I thought I unmuted. We usually go to 3:30, 4 o'clock.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I'm not running over.
Yep.
All right. No more questions on the color chart. Going once, going twice. How can we get a color chart? Jackie asks. A couple of things I can do. I would be more than happy. Sue can answer that question.
Yeah, for everybody who is attending today, Scott already sent me color charts and dot cards. So I am going to be mailing those to all people who are viewing today. Tomorrow, I'm going to mail them out. So you should get them in a couple of days. If you don't, let me know. Because we'll have the dot card plus the color chart.
Yep. And color chart to me is probably one of the most important things that I can impart with you all, so that you can have a better understanding of kind of how our line works. So Sue, if you ever need, if you run out of color charts at any time, please feel free to send me a note, and I'd be happy to get more in the mail. Yeah,
that would be great. I think we would like to send them to new members too, so that would be awesome. But I think we have enough certainly for now. And by the way, Scott, I wanted to say thank you, for the donation from Daniel Smith for our annual show. So that was really awesome too.
Well, it's very important for us as a company to support, our local organizations. You guys are the lifeblood of what we do.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. Just stop on transparency for a moment, just so that you all can kind of see what that looks like to us. So at the top there, you have quinacridone burnt orange. you can see that it looks very bright and vibrant on the left, but then on the right where the black watercolor ground is, you don't see any of it all at all. So that's so there's a good example of what a transparent color would look like. And then down below it, you have permanent red, and permanent red is a semi-transparent color. So you're going to see it very bright and vibrant on the left. And then where the black is, you're going to start to see the red a little bit. And then down below it, that's chromium green oxide. And chromium green oxide is a opaque color, and you're able to see quite a bit of that green over that black watercolor ground. So that's kind of how we look at that. Here's a little test for y'all. Let's see if everybody retained everything that we talked about there. So that circle number 1, we didn't talk about it, but what that is that's the series of the color. So when I say series, that has to do with the cost. So we use a 1 through 5 system. So 1 is the least expensive, 5 would be the most expensive. Down below it, we tell you that this color is ultramarine blue. And then after that, I want you guys to help me out here. So what's the first piece of information beyond ultramarine blue that we give you?
15 ml tube.
Right. So basically it's, in this particular color, we offer it in all of our formats. So we offer it in a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a watercolor stick, and a half pound. So what's next? What does that Roman numeral 1 mean?
Light fast.
Very good. So that means that color is light fast beyond 100 years. And what's next? What's the number 3?
Staining.
Yeah, it's a medium staining color. So when you put that color down, that's going to be a color where you're only going to be able to pull up a limited amount of that color. And what does the Y mean?
Granulation.
Yeah, it means that color, yes, it granulates in various degrees. And then that fully open circle means what?
Transparency.
Right, so that color is fully transparent. So some of you old pros might know what that number down on the bottom means, but for those of you who don't know, this is actually the pigment information. So P is always going to stand for pigment. B is going to stand for a particular color family. Which color family?
Blue.
Blue. And the 29, this is the actual shade. So if you were to go to our pigment manufacturer and visit their showroom and look through some of their reference materials, number 1, PB1, would be a very, very dark midnight blue color. Now, as the shades continually get lighter, that number goes up. So in this case, this is pigment blue, the 29th shade.
Scott, this is Susan. And this is considered what a lot of people, I think, get confused with too, is a single pigment color, correct?
Correct. So when, say, for instance, we have another color that uses multiple pigments to achieve the hue that we want, we would list them down below. So for instance, if I look at, let's see, let's pick a good one here. Rose of Ultramarine, okay? So Rose of Ultramarine is that same PB29, but it's also mixed with Pigment Violet number 19. So when you have, when you look at our color chart, you'll see that there are certain colors that utilize more than one pigment to achieve the way that color looks. So the reason why we give that to you is so that you can look at it on a color wheel and be able to make accurate determinations about what you can mix with it and what you can't. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to make mud.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
So I see on the color card that there are 4 colors, at least I can see, Venetian red, Indian red, transparent brown oxide, and transparent red oxide, they all have PR101, only PR101.
Mhm.
So what makes them different than if they just have that one pigment?
That is such a great question. You actually put it up on a tee for me in a very good way. So okay, so here's where kind of the trade. This is kind of where some of the trade secrets come in. So when pigment manufacturers make product for paint manufacturers, sometimes what they'll do is they'll create subshades to every one of these shades. Okay, so for example, when you look at the Daniel Smith Prussian blue and you compare it to the Winsor Newton Prussian blue, they both say they have the same pigment number, but yet they're clearly different. So one of the things that pigment manufacturers do to entice new business from paint manufacturers is that they'll go and create subshades for popular shades. So PB29, without a doubt, is probably the most popular blue. Okay. Now, depending upon what the pigment manufacturer does with the subshade, it allows paint manufacturers to have different takes on particular colors. So that's the case with PR 101. So we give you enough information to kind of give you an idea of where you are on the color chart, but we don't give away actually what the actual trade secret is and what makes our paint or that particular color for us unique. Because let me ask you this: what's the #1 job of a paint manufacturer? If they don't do this, they're out of business.
Sell paint.
Absolutely. So, and do you think you would sell a lot of paint if your colors looked like everyone else's?
You don't, I don't know. Maybe not.
Well, then that's the problem. If your paint looks like everyone else, then there's really not something that makes you stand out from the others.
Good point.
So that's why that exists on our color chart. Okay. Some of the other products that we make that you might be interested in is the Daniel Smith watercolor ground. So what's really nice about watercolor ground is that it allows you to use your watercolors on different surfaces other than paper. Okay, so you can use them on all of these things down here. You can use them on wood and plaster and canvas, masonite. All of those things that you see down there are watercolor ground will work on so that you can use your watercolors. So one of the really cool things my wife did one year is that she went ahead and took wine bottles and stripped the labels off and went ahead and put some black watercolor ground on them. She let it set up for 24 hours. And then after that, she was able to take her watercolor and paint directly onto the ground. And the ground, what its goal is, it wants to replicate a 140 pound cold press. So it's acrylic based in nature. So that's the base product of it. But you're able to use it on a multitude of different surfaces to be able to create something that replicates what we can have from 140 pound watercolor. So all you will really want to do with it is you want to go ahead and prep the surface, but just get some sandpaper, sand it down a little bit so that you can get some additional adhesion. And then after 24 hours goes by, then you're able to paint over the top of it because you need to allow the underlayers time to dry so that the paint doesn't penetrate all the way down to your surface. So it's a really handy thing if you want to try something wild and fun. Try using our watercolor grounds on substrates that are different from paper. The other thing that could be used for too is, occasionally we all make a mistake or things that we want to take back. You could take our titanium or our buff titanium ground and go over the area where you're not happy with, and then it's like getting a do-over. Okay. Last thing there is we also have walnut ink, and we use a 100% walnuts when we make this. So ours is very light fast and really beautiful I think for using specifically like for tree trunks and things like that. It's just such a rich and beautiful color. All right. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn my camera around so that you all can kind of see what I'm doing in front of me. And I'm actually gonna paint out some of these colors. So feel free to go ahead and keep your questions coming, just like Sue here. I think I hit that one pretty hard. PBR7, so that's pigment brown 7. Same thing. So there's lots of different subshades to a lot of our shades. Yep, I'm gonna show you the watercolor sticks. That'll be the first thing I do. So let me go ahead and get my camera turned around here. And there we go. So here is my watercolor stick. Let me grab this one. So this is quinacridone gold. Oops. There we are. Get a little bit closer. So one of the things that you notice when you, just from touching this, is that you notice that it doesn't really have a smooth feel to it. This doesn't have any wax in it. So it's a little bit different than a traditional watercolor crayon per se. Because remember, this only has the pigment or mineral and the gum arabic. That's it. So there's no distilled water added to this. So you could do this a couple different ways. You can just go ahead and take the stick and bring it into your water and do that to be able to kind of create some structure underneath. But the problem that I have with that is that it's really kind of tough to remove some of the, let me move that back so you guys could actually see. You don't really remove a lot of that, some of the initial line that went down. You really have to work it really hard to get it out. So, so this isn't my favorite way to do it. It doesn't seem to work very well for me to take the stick and put it in water and then use it as a drawing media. What I like to do actually, and it's very similar idea to like what we do with a half pan, is that either I can hold the pan in my hand and do that and just pull the paint directly from the stick and then go about it. Because then when I do that, I get a much more uniform lay down of the color. You can see the difference here between the two different approaches. But the watercolor sticks have the same ratio of pigment that the tubes do. So those are the watercolor sticks. So those are available in 51 colors. The other thing that's nice about those also is that they all have the same price. They all are, they have a retail of $14.76 per stick. And they last a really long time. So, and they're all the same price point. So it doesn't matter whether it's sodalite, whether it's quinacridone gold, they all have a single price point, which is kind of nice. All right, first color I'm gonna paint out is amethyst. And we use real amethyst when we make this color. Let me show you a few pieces here that I have. It's really interesting. It's got a lot of mica associated with it. Let's see how it's pretty translucent. Here's another piece. And it creates a really, really beautiful, deep purple. And I like it quite a bit. Get this down some. There we go. All right. So this is amethyst, and it's a really deep, heavily granulating purple. Okay. Question. I've seen sticks cut to fit in half or full pans. Is there an advantage to using the sticks that way instead of drying out the tube paint in the half or full pans? No advantage. They both re-wet actually equally as well. So there's no disadvantage at all. There's no advantage either way. Both should react very similarly. All right, let's look at lapis lazuli. So my thing with lapis lazuli is kind of a love-hate thing. I love the mineral. I think the mineral is beautiful, but the potency or the staining power with this color is a little bit different than I would normally expect. Than I expect. So I'm going to go ahead and show you kind of what I mean. So here you see what it looks like in its mask tone. And then when I paint it out, it's a little bit different. It's almost a very nice cobalt blue. Very interesting. And let's look at burnt tiger's eye. So I showed you the mineral, and it actually makes a very, very nice, rich brown, almost like a Van Dyke or a Van Dyck brown. There it is. That over a little more. There you go. There you go. All right. All right. This will be the last one in the Permatech colors I show you. The ones that are going to come after this will be our synthetic colors. So this is Mayan blue. So this is the color that really made me fall in love with Daniel Smith all of those years ago. And it is a very rich and deep blue. Absolutely my favorite. And then what I'll do sometimes, just as something fun to kind of blend with, I'll take some Quinn Gold. And the combination of Quinn Gold and the Mayan Blue actually creates some very interesting fingering effects through the paint. Lots of beautiful greens. You also get some really kind of cool rusts. Love that. Okay, let's look at some of our non-mineral colors. First one, probably one of our most popular ones. Everybody seems to know Moonglow. It's got one of those names that seems very unusual, and I always get the question about how do we name our colors. So Moonglow was actually a oops color. We didn't intend to make it. It's a combination of ultramarine blue, anthraquinoid red, and what was the, oh, and raw sienna. So it's basically those three colors actually make this. And he got a little heavy-handed with the anthracenoid red. And what we found when he did that, it created this really beautiful effect. And he was so excited that he ran to the owner of Daniel Smith. His name is John. John's the owner for Daniel Smith in the last 15 years. So he ran over to John and just said, look at this beautiful color. And John goes, what happened here? And he said, don't ask. But isn't the color beautiful?
This is Susan. Moonglow is an awesome color, and the way it separates is just unreal.
Yeah, and it's really kind of the fun mystery of what it's going to turn into when it's dry. You can already start. I'm already starting to see the red kind of set up. It's really pretty fun. All right, let's see. We have two new colors that we released that we're releasing this year, and there was one that we released last year. So are you guys familiar with Lauren McCracken? He's
Yes.
an artist that uses our colors quite a bit. And we made a new color for him called McCracken Black. So I'm going to show you guys what that looks like. And it's a very interesting color. It's transparent in nature, which is kind of interesting for a black. We always think of black as being either semi-opaque or opaque. But this one is really neat because it gives you a lot of different tonality in terms of being able to offer a very diverse amount of color. So depending upon how you use it, it can be very, very dark and opaque, but then as you brush it out, it actually becomes very transparent. It's a very interesting color.
What are the pigments?
They actually
What are
use
the pigments?
they actually use 6 pigments to make it, which is kind of crazy to me. I've never heard of that before. But I'll make sure to get to Sue what those 6 pigments are. Okay, the other one that we released last year, and it just didn't get a lot of buzz because of everything that was going on with COVID, but it's phthalo turquoise blue. Phthalo blue turquoise, sorry. And it is a wonderful color. Oops. As with all of the phthalos, they're very powerful.
So that's a very staining color, I'm assuming.
Yes. Let's look at the color chart. So phthalo blue turquoise. It's a 3. So it's a medium staining color. Definitely something that when you work with, you need to be mindful of. All right, well, let's do one more and then I'll just kind of end it with the opportunity for you guys to ask some questions. So let's, we'll go out on Quin Sienna. Very bright and vibrant color. Boy, it's taken quite a bit to get rid of that phthalo blue turquoise out of my brush. All right, here is Quin Sienna, and it is very bright, very rich. All right, do you guys have any questions before we finish up? All right, you're welcome, Margaret. I'd be happy to come back at any time.
Okay, well, if you guys have some questions, now would be the time. Scott, this has been awesome. It really, I learned a lot. I don't know about everybody else, but fascinating.
No, it's fun stuff, and I enjoy so much being able to kind of work with people who are curious like me and want to know more about their materials.
Definitely. Okay, guys, well, now's your chance. This will be recorded, and we will have it out there for everybody to rewatch, especially when you get your dot cards. You might want to go back and see what Scott had to say about one color or another if he demoed it. Other than that, I think we're going to say thank you.
Yes,
All right.
thank you very much. It was great.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Everybody stay safe. And, hopefully when we're done with all of this, I'll come back and do this all in person again.
Yeah, you can come back to the, it's called the Historic Hoover Theater. That's where we were.
That's right. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, but it's attached to a middle school. That's why you thought it was a school. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I sincerely wish you a happy and healthy rest of your year, and cross our fingers. We're all back to doing what we want to do here pretty soon. And Sue, thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody.